While on a fishing trip, Mark Ahlers witnessed two masters in action. One was a master of playing a joke, and the other was the master at taking a joke. This morning, Mark recalls that experience as he presents his speech titled, "The Bucket." Please welcome distinguished Toastmasters, Mark Ahlers.
Thank you, Todd. I've always admired a person who was good at playing practical jokes, particularly when the joke wasn't directed towards me. But it wasn't until I went on a fishing trip that I began to appreciate the talent and skill needed to take a joke. After 4 hours of trolling unsuccessfully for sailfish off the west coast of Costa Rica, I found myself on the upper level of a 28-foot fishing boat, seated just to the right of the captain. As I was about to nod off, I heard a shh sound. I turned, and there was the first mate, Hugo, hanging from the ladder. He looked over to the captain and me and said, "Shh, the bucket." I said, "What?" He said, "Shh, the bucket." Then he pointed to the deck down below. There at the back of the boat was the practical jokester, Danny. He had a big, mischievous grin on his face and a 5-gallon plastic bucket in his hand. A moment later, Hugo was at the back of the boat. He carefully tied the line from a very sturdy pole to the handle of that bucket. Then he lowered the bucket into the water and began letting out the line. Meanwhile, Rich, the target of Danny's practical joke, was sleeping soundly on the beanbag chair across the deck. I had a feeling Rich's peaceful rest was about to end. Then Danny yelled, "Fish on! Fish on!" I looked down and saw Rich's head pop up, and he began to rub his eyes in the bright sunlight. Then Danny yelled, "Rich, quick, grab the pole. We got a big one on." Well, Rich scrambled to his feet and then staggered to the back of the boat. Hugo handed Rich the pole, secured the fishing belt around Rich's waist, and then carefully guided Rich into the fishing chair at the back of the boat. As Rich began to reel in the big one, Danny ramped up the drama some more when he looked over to Hugo and said, "Hugo, quick, get these other poles out of the way. Rich has got a big one on. We need plenty of room to land it." With that, Hugo and Danny began reeling in the other poles that were positioned on either side of the boat. After they'd reeled them all in and secured them, Danny stirred the pot some more when he looked over to Rich and said, "Rich, where's your camera? We need some photos of the big one." Well, Rich immediately yelled for Kurt, Kurt, get my camera, get my camera." Well, Kurt was laughing so hard down below that he was unable to make an appearance up on deck. But he was able to hand the camera up to Danny. And as Danny began snapping a few photos, Rich had reeled the big one to within about 15 feet from the back of the boat. Then he stood up and peered out into the ocean to view his catch. Suddenly, he exclaimed in surprise, "It's a bucket!" And you know, I think he actually believed that we had somehow managed to snag that bucket out of the middle of the ocean. But that thought died quickly when Rich heard the belly laughs and revelry coming from Kurt and Rod down below deck. Suddenly, his demeanor changed. His body tensed. And I thought we were going to hear a few words of wisdom that only a true sailor could appreciate. But I was wrong. Rich quickly regained his composure, and then he calmly said, "You guys won't be laughing when we pull a couple fish out of that bucket." A moment later, Hugo carefully lifted the bucket up over the back rail and sat it down on the deck. All eyes were on that bucket to see if Rich had pulled off a miracle and somehow managed to capture a couple unsuspecting fish in that bucket. But there was no miracle. Likewise, no fish. A few moments later, Rich stood proudly with his pole in one hand and his prize bucket in the other as we gathered for a group photo. A copy of that photo still hangs on my office wall today, a testament of my respect and admiration for Rich and for all others who can take a joke. Mr. Toastmaster.